Hi, I'm Kim here at City Oasis in Northern California. I love to grow perennial veggies and herbs as well as an ever-expanding fruit and nut tree orchard. Now, today's video is number 3 in a 4-part series all about bare root fruit and nut trees. Now, this video, number 3, is all about how to plant your bare root fruit trees. Fruit and nut trees are a real investment, and I think we should all be really certain that we're going to get a wonderful return on that investment. So that's what I'd like to help you with here today. Now, planting bare root fruit and nut trees is not difficult. It's not time consuming. I planted all of mine 80 plus fruit and nut trees by myself. And that's with arthritis and other health issues. So if I can do it, you definitely can too. However, there are some essential steps that you need to follow to ensure that your tree stays healthy and becomes super productive. So why don't we get started on it right now? Now, before you plant your bare root fruit tree, you want to pick the right spot. It should get at least 6 to 8 hours of sun. And you want it to be in an area that doesn't get too much wind. Also, you want it to be in a place where you can easily get water to it, whether that is through sprinklers or a drip line or a hose. In some way, in some fashion, you need to be able to water that fruit tree, especially the first year or two, really well to get it firmly established. After that, you'll have to water it far less often. But it's really inconvenient, and ask me how I know, if you plant a tree far away from water. I learned my lesson on that early on. All right, the other thing you need to take into consideration when you're planting is the orientation of the tree. Now, almost all fruit trees are grafted, and you want to find that graft union. It's pretty obvious on the tree. If you look at the trunk, you'll see a spot where, say, here's the trunk and here's the graft union. It's not usually, at a diagonal, but you'll see a bump of some sort. You'll see, oh, this is where they grafted on the variety of fruit tree you want to the rootstock below, which, is selected for the height of the tree, dwarf, semi-dwarf, or regular. And it's also selected for, resistance to disease and things like that. And then they graft that variety that doesn't have those qualities onto the rootstock. Well, you want to find that graft and you want to face it to the northeast. That really will help you avoid sun scald and too much wind blowing directly on that graft, which is the most vulnerable part of the tree. Now I'm going to give you a quick rundown of the 7 things you need to think about when you're planting that tree. Of course, it'd be better if I was doing this outside, actually planting a tree, but that's not what's happening today. It's freezing out there, and I'm not planting any trees this week, maybe next week. But I want you to be prepared before you go out to plant your tree. It's not hard to understand or visualize. Here we go. Number 1, when you get that tree, whether you're going to plant it the same day you receive it, or you're taking that bare root fruit tree out of the trench that you had it dug in and covered over with mulch, and you're going to soak the roots for 1 or 2 hours. Not more. You don't want to drown them. Really, an hour is sufficient. And while the roots are soaking, you're going to dig your hole. Now, your hole should be 2 times as wide as the root system of the tree. It should only be as deep as the level that the fruit tree was originally planted. And you'll be able to see that line very clearly, either because they painted a little line on there or because there's just a difference in the color of the wood on the trunk. But you will be able to see what the planting level was before. And that's where you're going to want the level to be now. Basically, trees don't like to be buried too deeply, and you don't want to cause root rot by having all the crowning roots down too low. So definitely plant it at that correct level that you'll be able to see on the trunk line. Before you put it in the ground, though, you're going to want to make sure that your hole has good drainage, because if it doesn't, you're not going to have enough oxygen for your tree roots and you're going to drown the tree. So you're going to fill that hole with water and let it drain. It should not take more than 3 to 4 hours to drain. Now, a lot of people suggest you fill it, let it drain, and then fill it again, and then see how long does it take to drain. If you already know you have super good drainage where you're planting the tree, you can skip this step. But if you're not sure, you better check it out before you plant the tree. Now, if you don't have good drainage, if it takes a little longer than that to drain, you can get around this. And I did this myself with several of my trees, including all my peach trees. You can, in fact, plant your bare root fruit tree on a mound rather than in a hole. So you might dig a little shallow hole just to break up the soil mostly, and then mound the soil up a ways, set the tree directly on it, and drape the roots over that mound. And then you're going to put on the soil on top of the roots. Now, the way I did it was I put a wooden box around the tree, so I was able to fill in that box with soil, covering the roots and allowing my trees to basically sit on top of the ground. I have 4 or 5 trees that I did that with, and they've all done just as well as the trees that went directly into the ground. But the planting method is basically the same. If you are planting in a hole, you're going to create a little mound within the hole for the bottom of the tree to rest on, the stump of the trunk, as it were, the very bottom. It's going to rest on that little mound, and again, you're going to drape the roots down over it. This is all within that hole. And then you're going to, step 4, backfill the hole with native soil. Remember, don't put in any amendments. I know some people will tell you to do that, but actually you should not. If you have horrible soil, you probably should prep your soil in advance of planting fruit trees by adding organic material to it, adding your own compost to it, letting it break down within that place you're going to later plant the fruit tree, a season in advance. But no, you really don't want to be amending the soil for the reasons I told you before of having the roots just stick right there and not expand outward. That can be a real problem. So it's much easier, less expensive, and much more effective to just use native soil to fill that hole. The 5th step after you fill the hole is to create a watering basin. And basically the edge of this, which will be 3 or 4 inches high, should be at the projected drip line of the tree. As the branches of your tree grow outward over the next year or 2, you're going to have a projected drip line. Now, in the beginning, it's not going to be that far out. Where your branches extend to and the water will therefore drip down from is probably only going to be 1.5 feet, 2 feet from the tree in a circle all the way around. And then as the tree grows over the years, you'll expand that watering basin. But you definitely want to do that before you do the next step, step number 6, which is where you add the mulch. Now, this can be wood chips. It's a great mulch for fruit trees and decomposes nicely, adding organic material to the soil. But you can also put compost there. And this should be done 4 to 6 inches away from the trunk. You want to leave a space 4 to 6 inches around your trunk, or you will probably cause trunk rot. So you definitely want to do that. The way I found it easiest to do that was I put a wire cage of hardware cloth around the trunk of my tree about 2 feet up. This protects the trunk of the tree, the tender bark, from rabbits and squirrels and such that might want to chew on the trunk. It also keeps that mulch away from the trunk. So that's just a multi-purpose method I use that's worked really well. Now, you want this mulch to be a good 4 to 8 inches deep. More wouldn't hurt either. But that's going to protect the roots of your tree during its first hot summer and then keep it protected again throughout the cold of its first winter in the ground. The mulch will also help retain all that moisture in the ground when you water the tree. The 7th and last step in planting your fruit tree is optional. If you think you need it, go ahead and stake your tree. If your tree does not seem really firm where it is, or if you live in a really windy area, definitely put a stake in the ground and tie the tree to it. They say with rubber, say for instance an old inner tube from a bike tire, but I've used something quite a bit different that has worked really well for me and tends to last 2 years usually, and that is what we call an old ace bandage. Basically, the type of stretchy bandage you use when you sprain your wrist or your ankle, that works super well for holding up trees to a stake, whether that's a metal pipe, a T-stake, a wooden stake. You use that stretchy material and it gives with the tree. It doesn't cut into the tree at all. And of course, that's the same with the rubber, but I would not use other things like rope because that can cut into the tree, especially with as young as bare root fruit trees are. I suppose we could add step 8, common sense, but you definitely need to do it. And that is water those trees super well after you've got them planted. They need an hour or 2 of water, depending on, how fast the water's coming out of that hose or drip line. But you really need to soak the ground. Now, if you soaked it to test the drainage of that hole, you've got a head start, but you really want to soak your trees and water them regularly a couple times a week throughout the summer that first year. And if you get really hot, like we do here sometimes, 110, 115 degrees Fahrenheit, you're going to need to water it even more. The first 2 to 3 years of your fruit tree's lives on your property and your orchard is definitely going to be the period that you need to spend the most time, the most effort establishing your trees. After that, they're going to take care of themselves almost entirely. There are other things you can do to promote the health of your trees and prevent having to, say, spray them to keep everything organic, to promote a lot of fruiting. And we can talk about that another time, but this is what you need to know about planting bare root fruit trees. So I hope this video has given you a clear idea on how to go about planting your bare root fruit trees. And if you have any questions about the process, just go ahead and ask in the comments below. And if you are interested, I did a video very recently on planting my Bare Root Nectarine tree, so you can go ahead and watch that to get a visual idea of the process. And I will link that here on the screen as well as in the comments below. I'll also link the 4th video in this bare root fruit tree series, which is all about where to buy your bare root fruit and nut trees. Wherever you are, have a wonderful week, and until next time, happy growing.